I heard it intimated by the colonel that it is New England that makes New York and builds up this country and makes it great, overlooking the fact that there's a lot of people here who came from elsewhere, like John Hay from away out west and Wayne McVeigh from away out in my state and Howells from Ohio and St. Clair McKelway and me from Missouri. And we are doing what we can to build up New York a little, elevate it. Why, when I was living in that village of Hannibal, Missouri, on the banks of the Mississippi, and Hay up in the town of Warsaw, also on the banks of the Mississippi River, well, it was an emotional bit of the Mississippi, and if it is low water, you have to climb up to the town on a ladder. And when it floods, you have to hunt for it with a deep sea lead. It was a simple life, cheap but comfortable and full of sweetness, and there was nothing of this rage of modern civilization there at all. It was a delectable land. I went out there last June, and I met in that town of Hannibal a schoolmate of mine, John Briggs, whom I had not seen for more than 50 years. I tell you, that was a meeting. That pal, whom I had known as a little boy long ago, and knew now as a stately man 3 or 4 inches over 6 feet and browned by exposure to many climes, he was back there to see that old place again. We spent the whole afternoon going about here and there and yonder, and hunting up the scenes and talking of the crimes which we had committed so long ago. It was a heartbreaking delight, full of pathos, laughter, and tears, all mixed together. And we called the roll of the boys and girls that we picnicked and sweethearted with so many years ago, and there were hardly half a dozen of them left. The rest were in their graves. And we went up there on the summit of that hill, a treasured place in my memory, the summit of Holliday's Hill, and looked out again over that magnificent panorama of the Mississippi River, sweeping along league after league, a level green paradise on one side, and retreating capes and promontories as far as you could see on the other, fading away in the soft, rich lights of the remote distance. I recognized then that I was seeing now the most enchanting river view the planet could furnish. I never knew it when I was a boy. It took an educated eye that had traveled over the globe to know and appreciate it. And John said, "Can you point out the place where Bear Creek used to be before the railroad came?" I said, "Yes, it ran along yonder." "And can you point out the swimming hole?" "Yes, out there." And he said, "Can you point out the place where we stole the skiff?" Well, I didn't know which one he meant. Such a wilderness of events had intervened since that day more than 50 years ago. It took me more than 5 minutes to call back that little incident, and then I did call it back. It was a white skiff, and we painted it red to allay suspicion. And the saddest man came along, a stranger he was, and he looked that red skiff over so pathetically, and he said, "Well, if it weren't for the complexion, I'd know whose skiff that was." He said it in that pleading way, you know, that appeals for sympathy and suggestion. We were full of sympathy for him, but we weren't in any condition to offer suggestions. I can see him yet as he turned away with that same sad look on his face and vanished out of history forever. I wonder what became of that man. I know what became of the skiff. Well, It was a beautiful life, a lovely life. There was no crime, merely little things like pillaging orchards and watermelon patches and breaking the Sabbath. We didn't break the Sabbath often enough to signify, once a week perhaps. But we were good boys, good Presbyterian boys, all Presbyterian boys, and loyal and all that. Anyway, we were good Presbyterian boys when the weather was doubtful. When it was fair, we did wander a little from the fold. Look at John Hay and me. There we were in obscurity, and look where we are now. Consider the ladder which he has climbed, the illustrious vocations he has served. And vocations is the right word. He has in all those vocations acquitted himself with high credit and honor to his country and to the mother that bore him. Scholar, soldier, diplomat, poet, historian. Now see where we are. He is Secretary of State, and I am a gentleman. It could not happen in any other country. Our institutions give men the positions that of right belong to them through merit. All you men have won your places not by heredities and not by family influence or extraneous help, but only by the natural gifts God gave you at your birth, made effective by your own energies. This is the country to live in. Now there is one invisible guest here. A part of me is present. The larger part, the better part, is yonder at her home. That is my wife, and she has a good many personal friends here. And I think it won't distress any one of them to know that, although she is going to be confined to that bed for many months to come from that nervous prostration, there is not any danger, and she is coming along very well. And I think it quite appropriate that I should speak of her. I knew her for the first time just in the same year that I first knew John Hay and Tom Reed and Mr. Twitchell, 36 years ago. And she has been the best friend I have ever had, and that is saying a good deal. She has reared me, she and Twitchell together, and what I am I owe to them. Twitchell? Why, it is such a pleasure to look upon Twitchell's face. For 25 years I was under the Reverend Mr. Twitchell's tuition. I was in his pastorate, occupying a pew in his church, and held him in due reverence. That man is full of all the graces that go to make a person companionable and beloved. And wherever Twitchell goes to start a church, the people flock there to buy the land. They find the real estate goes up all around the spot, and they always try to get Twitchell to start a church somewhere else after a while, and wherever you see him go, you can go and buy land there with confidence, feeling sure that there will be a double price for you before long. I'm not saying this to flatter Mr. Twitchell. It is the fact. Many and many a time I have attended the annual sale in his church and bought up all the pews on a margin, and it would have been better for me spiritually and financially if I had stayed under his wing. I have tried to do good in this world, and it is marvelous in how many different ways I have done good, and it is comfortable to reflect. Now there's Mr. Rogers. Just out of the affection I bear that man, many a time I have given him points in finance that he had never thought of. And if he could lay aside envy, prejudice, and superstition and utilize those ideas in his business, it would make a difference in his bank account. Well, I like the poetry. I like all the speeches and the poetry too. I like Dr. Van Dyke's poem. I wish I could return thanks in proper measure to you gentlemen who have spoken and violated your feelings to pay me compliments. Some were merited, and some you overlooked, it is true. And Colonel Harvey did slander every one of you and put things into my mouth that I never said and never thought at all. And now I say there is your double guest, my wife and me, and we together, out of our single heart, return you our deepest and most grateful thanks. And yesterday was her birthday.